Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, our followers over the social media platforms of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, good morning to you all. Welcome to the ninth session of the Social Sciences and Humanities, a conference we embarked on in 2012. We on annual basis, then from 2017 onwards, every 2 years, and we award the Arab Award for the political and humanitarian, social science and political and humanitarian science, an award which has been linked to the establishment and accomplishment of research projects. This will be announced on Monday the 13th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Arab Center, through this conference, as is usual with other conferences, on careful selection of papers and on peer reviewing basis and adhering to the well-known standards which takes into consideration both the content and the form of scientific research papers. Some of the specificities of this conference is that Arab scientists from various disciplines of social sciences and humanities participate, and it's inclusively in Arabic language. This is an attempt by the Arab Center to enhance the Arabic content in this field and discipline. And the conference and the award are considered important pillars of the center's activities, in addition to books and papers. So far we have published more than 500 books in addition to the periodic journals in association with the Doha Institute, and of course on top of that we have other research projects and activities. It's worth mentioning in this regard that amongst the most important activities of the center is the Doha Historical Dictionary of the Arabic Language, which in 2022 completed the second phase, which covered until the 5th Hijri century, and the third phase starting from the 6th century Hijri. This is a period which spans 2,000 years of the Arabic language, in addition to the Arab Public Opinion Index, which takes into consideration all current affairs and relative issues in the lives of people in the Arab world, and also around the important questions pertaining to the renaissance of the Arab nation. And the center, of course, places itself at the heart of these efforts. on previous sessions of this conference, we dealt with issues relating to language, justice, ethics, identity, cultural life, and some of the works of the conference have been published in books and journals. I had the honor of editing some. Amongst these books was Language and Identity in the Arab World, Universities and Scientific Research in the Arab World, Why the Arab Youth Immigrate, Liberty and Freedom in Contemporary Arab Thought, the question of ethics in Arab Islamic civilization, and lately the contemporary Arab state, which was the fruit of the last session of the conference, which was held in 2021. This, of course, is in addition to a series of 5 books which search into the methodologies of social sciences and relative research. The Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies will be devoting this conference to the concept of political culture and political cultures in the Arab world, aiming to open the dialogue on to delve into these themes. I once again would like to welcome you, and it's our pleasure to welcome Dr. Azmi Bishara, Director General of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies and the Chairman of the Board of Directors of the Doha Institute, and he will be speaking on remarks on political culture. Good morning to you all. It's my pleasure to open the works of this conference, and we chose this theme because first it is ignored, and secondly because the researchers traditionally avoid that. So therefore this theme, despite its importance, it was ignored. Despite its importance, because it pertains to transition to democracy. So it's our pleasure to deal with it in a scientific manner in this conference. As it's known, this project of the study of political culture was dealt with as Sidney Verba defines this that the system of empirical beliefs, expressive symbols and values which defines the situation in which political action. He describes that as saying every political system is embedded in a particular pattern of orientation to political action. I have found it useful to refer to this as the political culture. Since the book, The Civic Culture, which was published, this joint book in 1963, and this is they say in the book that the term political culture thus refers to the specific political orientations, attitudes towards the political system and its various parts, and the attitudes towards the role of the self in the system. And after almost 2 decades of the publication of this book, The Civic Culture, Verba says that the political culture, in his opinion, did not constitute a theory, but rather an attempt to propose equations and establish the relations which he considers so significant between the individual's beliefs, values, and orientations towards the political system on the one hand, and the consideration and stability of that regime on the other. And he thinks that their studies were important, but the establishment of the two concepts, the political culture and political system, was tense. And by and large, culture was determined by the that things that which affect and impact our behavior without us realizing it. The things that impact us without thinking about them or without recognizing them. And since Herbert, what Montesquieu and Vico referred that to the environment, the natural environment and the geographical environment, since those days the political culture has gone through many stages. And in the 50s of last century, research started taking shape within the borders of a scientific methodology whereby it can be examined through individuals and their behavior, and not through a supposed collective culture. And of course, and so this is based on understanding empirically what individuals do, what you can discover through they tried to establish a natural thing, but he chose behaviorism in the political science and determined how the direction went. This methodology started setting and operating these concepts through building hypotheses which can be empirically examined, and the relationship of individuals with the individual orientations with political objects. And this is made up of 3 components: the cognitive, the affective, and evaluational. Immediately, any examining eye would realize that this is not absolute, this division, because say I evaluated something as negative, this will be impacting my affective feeling, and also and the evaluational will follow that. In real life, the division does not take place in this manner. As for the political objects, they are for the political system, the roles or structures, and the incumbent of roles That's why when individuals are asked about these things and their attitudes lead to cognitive, evaluational, and affective feelings. And the types of political culture are divided into parochial. If someone, if a person is concerned with his own local culture, and the culture of subject is as a subject, and he is the subject of the ruler, and they think this is more suitable for the despotic regimes than the participant, which is more suited for the democratic regimes or systems. In my opinion, this is close to what in the Middle Ages, when the participant thought was being established, they are the same, the features of civic culture is the same as the what they call the civic virtues. So therefore there should be an orientation toward political system in both the political and government sense. Second, pride in aspects of one's nation. Then, expectation of fair treatment from government authorities. Ability to talk freely and frequently about politics. 5, an emotional involvement in elections. This is supposing that there are elections. There are 10 things. They call these the features or characteristics of civic culture. If we look at them, we will realize that this cannot take place under a despotic authoritarian regime, because talking about freely about politics and treatment from government and fair treatment. So it's not just what we expect from the citizens, but what citizens expect from governments. This only happens under a democratic regime, and this is very important for the rest of our lecture. This is not a precursor for democracy, but happens within the democratic system if it's successful. As a result of this study and other subsequent studies, and researchers formulated these and through questionnaires with a reply of yes or no, and later I don't know was added. And then this is classified into orientational divisions. Let's take some of what Almond and Verva reach, which shows that the conclusion was this culture was only available in the US and United Kingdom, and they research France, Germany, Mexico, the UK, and the US. Has this been the result of living under a long democratic system, or is it a condition for the continuation of this system? And has the absence of these in Germany and Italy, we know the democratic system continued in Germany and Italy despite their conclusions. And of course, what does the phrase suit compatible with mean, and how does it change from compatible to supporting, for example? The researchers looked at functional structuralism, which searches into any social function and its role in maintaining the whole system. You look at the functional social function to see how it maintains the balance of the system, and the civic culture's role is to deal with tension, especially the tension between the government and the citizen who carries this culture. Is a citizen who is concerned with the participant. A participant citizen is like one who only concerns himself with his local affairs, and also like the subject and despotic or authoritarian regimes, but thirdly is also ready to participate in the political system, and the citizen who carries the civic culture, he carries the three. Now, he is not a participant all the time, and he is not participant sometimes when it's necessary. He is a parochial or a subject and a participant. The civic center contains these three elements, and this contains the political culture and the allegiance, rights and duties, and they can be discovered through questionnaires or questions posed to a representative sample, or maybe later on through social media and filterization itself. And this is on the political orientations on one side and the practical aspect, and these are the two aspects of political culture. I will not delve into the difficulties by social media. This will be something we'll deal with later on. And due to the confusion between cognitive and affective and expressive aspects, and sometimes there is exaggeration of doing anything to attract attention, and also sometimes a small group within a minority, within a majority, and impacts the opinion of the rest, or in challenging this as a way of verbal terrorization of the opinion, and in addition to propaganda campaigns and through information or misinformation which can have an impact, and also dealing political culture, prevalent political culture has different names, like traditions of society, belief system, and what is accepted, what is halal, what is haram, lawful and unlawful, which is linked to religion, and also the values of the freedom, individual freedom, and the other rights and duties to and Tocqueville calls this the intellectual or the customs, habits of the hearts and minds. These are the prevalent traditions which is Hegel calls Zitlus time, or the common, to distinguish the common ethics and the individual kills. In culture, some aspects are supposed to impact the political orientation of individuals, and it can be called political culture. Many analysts think that the prevalent culture of a whole people in general, without specifying if it's political or not, can lead to this. What gives political cultures theories a bad name. I disagree for five. Is first of all, no peoples have one unique conform culture. Secondly, this is secondly, it's difficult to establish a cause and effect relationship and between culture and the political system. It's normally done through questionnaires, and as thirdly, the more often than not, a people which lives under a despotic regime can be totally isolated or secluded. For the relations or customs are within the community or the individual or communities. As for the relationship of the individual and the modern state is determined by the state itself, if there is direct linkage and conversion, with the reservation that the modern state, when it's weak and faced with strong civil society organizations or establishments, it will impact the state. And we're talking about the traditional also, and number five, the features of this cannot be understood unless through the interaction with interests and the impact of the incumbent political system, because there is a relationship between these customs and the social customs and the causal relationship between the social phenomena, complex phenomena, is not a cause and effect relationship. It's an interaction where the cause and effect are changed and they exchange roles between them. We're talking about complex social things. And we cannot reject totally that the culture and all culture is one, organic in all its parts, that can conclude the macro and total aspect from an individual and so on. Like this is not like the DNA. We cannot look at a cell and determine the whole thing. Culture does not have a DNA, and at the same time we cannot refuse that as a community or people can have a culture. Maybe a culture has one language or a religion surrounded by written or oral, documented or oral culture, but this does not mean that this, at the heart of this civilization, there is one essence or one core ethical core, or is it divided between the different social groups? So therefore the culture of any people is not always cohesion and without any tension, whether religious or otherwise, and we cannot procedurally call this political culture, but political culture is not derived from one essence, but people with their different diverse cultures within the same culture deal differently with the prevalent conditions, political and otherwise, and it's impossible can one cohesive political culture can derive. The different cultures belonging to different peoples within community interacting with each other, like for example what Moroccan subject and participant, as we talked about, like the two researchers set forth their definitions and started classifying cultures as supporting of democracy compatible or not, and according to a certain section in society and through the semiotic interpretation. And I say even when we conclude that there is a cultural, political of some sort, we and in the daily lives of people, this is a big obstacle hindering the word of people's individuals behaviors in their lives is not classified according and resultant of one political culture. It's all dependent on fearing for themselves, their interests, their family, and social and recognition, improving their social status, belonging, interest, and this is not necessarily linked to one particular culture. It's there in every culture, and this is what drives people by and large. Of course, we're not denying the impact of political orientations, but the political behavior of these people it's not a one directional cause and effect. And also we cannot divide people as conformist or challenging or resisting of they can simply be adaptive. They can be conformative or revolutionary resistant. They can be just adaptive to the political system. And the fact that a human being is free and the decisions taken by individuals come from his free will, that a person has a free will faced with different choices and he chooses one. This is not just a philosophical analysis of a human being as a free-willed individual, but it also contains a moral judgment of what people should be with. We create a concept or understanding of a human being, and then we start saying that we create the concept and the human being, then we say he or she should or should not do, and this changes it from a scientific perspective to an ethical one, a judgmental one. So therefore, this means to a conversion of and we have verbs like there is and there should be and he should or shouldn't be, and this is in fact these are a potential in people and can change into an action as a result of the interaction with the cultural and social conditions and according to how they realize it. And it's better that freedom and liberty is the essence of man, yes, as philosophers say, but you cannot come out of that into an action. A human being is potentially free if he is aware of this. Is my addition. And this is a different philosophical proposition than what I read. People in their private affairs behave according to their desires, wishes, and potential, and like a settlement between these aspects. And when it comes to the public affairs, then people who are not recruited to a party or a society or a member of society, they try to avoid their choices, thereby neutralizing their freedom and their ability, and they adapt to the current prevalent situation, and also according to win or lose or interest or other considerations. But escaping this and avoiding decision is a action with a value in nature, and say an individual responds to a question in a questionnaire, but maybe this does not matter to him in his life. And if the researcher insists on him to take a position, a certain position, that he avoided taking a position, and he put first his calculations based on interest rather than moral and ethical consideration, or he, for example, says politics is not important, or he realizes that he's ineffective and politics is all to do with interest and there is no difference between any party, or simply conditions are stronger, then there is no end to the possibilities of explanations. An individual is not an epical champion hero who moves from one decision to another in his life, and also going forth or going backwards or staying put. The individual sometimes avoids any action. But can we say, as a conclusion, this kind of culture is compatible with authoritarian regime? Undoubtedly, many people behave according to their convictions or adapt them. There are dramatic situations where people take decisions regarding the common good and issues, and sometimes would be more responsive when faced with choices, when it comes to his dignity or feeling that an injustice has done to him, or a grievance, or when he balances between what's interest and what's principle, or these ethical considerations for him are strong. And also at times of crises, evolutions, and changes in the political system which can impact his life or his family's life, or when he feels that the political system is weak and is about to change, and he can take decisions vis-à-vis the system without fear. As for the political elites, I'm not talking economic or cultural elites, I'm talking political elites which are more impacted and impactful of the political situation. We call them political elites regardless of their economic, because of their expect decisions from them, and also people expect from them to take positions and decisions, and also their orientations and positions are more important than normal circumstances when people do not rush into political participation. It's a bit risky to claim that using a quantitative methodology and reaching conclusions about Stephen Welsh. I think he is the most serious writer about political culture and wrote two important books about it. And we can reject a relationship between the nature of the political system and the prevalent culture, but this does not mean that it's necessary to give up a political theory. And now I want to note that, and after concluding that the discussion regarding political culture can make us not pay enough attention on other aspects which impact the lives of people. And I mean by that the ethics, the general ethics, which is relating to the behavior in the public sphere. And the despotic regimes calls a crisis in this public ethics and hinders the building of a democracy because it damages trust between people and spreading the message of hypocrisy and corruption and neglect of public utilities and installations as if they belong to nobody, and deal with this is either as a threat or something they can loot. This is some of the impact of the despotic regimes on ethics. Yet these ethics remain as impactful on public, on people, regardless of the political action. And sometimes this can be the decisive factor, especially if we set aside the economic sectors. And of course, they are important in people's acceptance of the political system. Their life can be hell under these regimes, and people can leave his house without knowing what to expect from people's behavior on the street or at work or the clinic, or you go to, for example, you meet a policeman, he turns out to be a bandit. A doctor turns out to be behaving like a businessman. And if the society is lives as when the society is disintegrated under a despotic regime without seeing the virtues of citizenship and the rights and duties towards others, and if there is some sort of a perception about the public good, even if we differ on it, this on its own will change people's behavior towards each other, and to deal with what is public as something belongs to everybody. And so, for example, I'm talking about the public good, and also to raise above some biases and ethics. For example, we're talking about groups like a political entity, similarly to how it was in the tribal systems before. This do not look like ideological and political, but they can be the most important, and therefore when an atmosphere of lack of trust, fear of freedoms, and people look at the state to oppose the norms, and this prepares people for a despotic regime, and there is no longer any objection amongst people for a return to a despotic regime. The civic culture theorists used to think that this culture contributes to the continuation of the democratic system. When there is a crisis, the fact that there is a culture which is supportive of the democratic regime would help the system the two authors did not claim that this is a precondition, but in the conditions of the Cold War, in the media and some non-specialized academic circles, there was talk of the compatible political culture became a condition or a precursor, and therefore they described the culture of people which are under the influence of the Soviet bloc or American bloc as their cultures which are not compatible to democracy. In the Arab world, when many rulers, when they talk before Western audiences, they insist that standards of democracy and human rights are not compatible with our people. They say these are values you bring from the West, and our people are not suited or compatible to that, and we don't have a political culture before democracy comes. And the democratic system in the West has reproduced itself without necessarily unanimity on political values, but only exclusively on when there is no unanimity, there is a question of settling differences, and this encourages people to depart from the zero-sum games and choose concessions and to reach a consensus, not a consensus, but a solution. This has remained linked to the national identity and did not apply to those outside it, and the citizenship concept was expanded to include women, workers, and others, and social rights appeared also, and the social rights and the rights of the minorities is still the subject of a debate and a struggle sometimes. Political culture in the Gulf and the rights of minorities is still a subject to some struggle in the West. And also, when people in our part of the world say that in the West democracy happened because there was political culture that preceded it, and some people even link that to the North Atlantic peoples features, and there is not the whole of it, like North Atlantic, Scandinavia, Britain, and America, and linked that to the Greek philosophy or Judo-Christian culture and their tribal councils. These are not just something specific to Germanic tribes, and the Judo-Christian culture is supposed after democracy was established. The two culture, Christian and Judaic culture, have in them components which are anti-democracy as much as there is one's pro. This are contributed to them in retrospect. Also, what is called the question of respecting the rule of law, respecting the rights of citizens, is linked to the phases of, and this lasted for more than a century in the West. As for the liberal system, it started without being democratic. The humble beginnings of that is not explained by any previous models, but it's linked to historical conditions, linked to the the triangle of the king, the aristocracy, and the bourgeoisie in Britain and France, and for other conditions in the United States. And there is no doubt that all three of these experiences have impacted each other, and the democracy, which of course Holland can be added to that, the development of democracy in any of these countries also recalled the political, economic, and social cultures in their countries and did not go through the same process. So the time is over. Okay, it's not necessary. The paper will be published, and if you want to read it in more details, it's not really necessary. If you think it's important, but there is nothing that's decisive about it. As for the political culture, it's important to Tocqueville and More, who when you study, I was reading Barrington Moore's book on the historical roots, and it was interesting how they understood slavery. Is this political culture or not? And Barrington Moore is one of the most important researchers. Moore talked about during Barrington Moore, in his book Social Origins of Dictatorship and Democracy, and he based it on the agrarian things and farmers' revolutions and the relationship between the farmers or peasants or bourgeoisie and the landowners, and he thinks the question will be solved under the leadership of the bourgeoisie. He doesn't refer to any political culture, and he thinks this will lead to the wrong conclusion. The political system is a result of the prevalence. Barrington Moore says the political system produces its own political culture. And when we're talking about historical periods, and when we're discussing one political development like a revolution or not, we have to take into consideration the political, cultural, and other aspects. And More, when discussed the American Civil War, accepted the relativity of the fact that the difference vis-a-vis slavery in the South and the North has led to a different culture and lack of trust between people who have different value systems or ethical systems, despite they share religion and origin and language. Two different cultures were produced in the North and the South, and it was no longer able to understand the Civil War without understanding this discrepancy in culture. And this, as for culture in the South, has changed gradually, and it took more than a century. And this proved that the government's systems and laws impact the political culture of people. More in his critique that individuals do not deal with reality like chemical elements behave in a test tube. He calls them filters, like there is expectations, there are needs and other things, and this filter hides part of the reality, the objective reality, reveals them and shows them. Tocqueville did not try to separate. He was not thinking of theoretical models. He wrote with his common sense. He did not form like theories. He looked at reality with the eyes of an observer who is common sense, has common sense. He did not try to separate economic and social conditions and cultural things, and he says that the settlers come from British Puritanian origins, and when the southern settlers who preceded them to Virginia came from various backgrounds, and they did not they had different resources. They all were coming by when the slavery was introduced, as Tocqueville, that narrow-mindedness and laziness and other factors, and the English personality, it seems that he didn't have a very kind opinion about the English personality. And when he talked about New England, when they were driven by the freedom of worship, Tocqueville emphasizes the high degree of cohesion between them, united by language, religion, and this self-administration in New England was based on that. The settlers in both South and North were English, but they immigrated for different reasons and established two different economic systems, and there were cultural differences according to the religion, school of thought, and the economic conditions. And when we look at the interaction of these elements, we cannot separate the social background and how they dealt with it. I have some other ideas, but I want to talk about one thing, and that is using culture as a way to escape talking about democratic change. And some Arab leaders and Orientalists, when they criticize cultures, they emphasize on the Arab culture or Islamic culture, saying that there cannot be democracy, and they make the presence of political culture a necessity. This does not happen in Germany. There was no time, nor after the Nazi period, and in Japan also. But the difference in our age and the 18th and 19th century, when they moved to democracy, in our age there is a ready democratic system, which, like what happened in Japan, they took it and applied it. There was a system, a previous system they did not want to go back to, and there was an international system which supported it. What is required in this stage is, the last thing required is the political culture. There has to be a minimum of amount of political culture amongst the elite to adopt the system, the democratic system, which is there already and ready. And also we should commit to democracy despite the differences by partisan and partisan, because the culture of people and the lack of confidence and all the things we talked about in the authoritarian systems and all the struggle between political parties would show that democracy is chaotic and people, all politicians run after their interests without any principle. But these are important issues, main issues which relate to political culture, and it's they Eli Kaddour is a very bad example. I think he hates Arabs. When you read his book, Democracy and the Arab Political Culture, you will be shocked with the amount of his hatred, and he considers World War One and World War Two and says the Arabs support the strong person, a strong party, and this is an established culture. And if we accept that, we cannot discuss the nature of the despotic systems. We have to change them. So, therefore, according to him, we will be in a vicious circle because we need to change the system, and we can't change it at the same time, and we cannot have democracy with them and democracy without them. And so, the non democratic culture is the result of the lack of political culture. If you did not have a political culture in the past, we will not have it in the future. This is why some people say that the Arab do not need or are not compatible with democracy. They need a strong man, a general to rule them. This is the talk people sit in their tea houses or somewhere and talk about it. And he thinks that the British try to impose democracy on the Arabs, and he blames them for that. Criticizing political culture is important, but you cannot go through a political struggle if you think it's an essence that cannot change. You can go through the struggle if you believe that cultures can change, and you can go through a struggle for a political culture when you believe that elites change and the system change. This is what I have to say, and I thank you very much, and may the blessings of God be upon you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azmi Bishara, for this presentation, valuable presentation, which is entitled General Observations about Political Culture, and which could have had a constituent kind of culture about political culture. So this is a general kind of constituent important paper that establishes the different frameworks that are based on ethnic Central European trends with the Weber and the other kind of authors. So Azmi Bishara also condoned the number of quotes that try to talk about certain Islamic countries or Arab countries that perhaps cannot follow the current transformations that are taking place in democratic countries. And he said that democratic political culture cannot happen as part of a series of practices and democratic change, and there is no DNA when it comes to culture, and culture it is not an essence, it can be transformed in order to implement any political system in a certain environment, and that the citizen can establish a new critical Arab norms, particularly in the presence of a kind of a lab, if we may call it so, in the presence of a number of uprisings and revolutions. So this is going to be the topic of the discussion that is going to take place in the adjacent room. We're going to have 4 sessions. We're going to start with Dr. Abdelhab Al-Effendi and Dr. Abdel Fattah Madi, and we're going to have 4 sessions tomorrow and 3 sessions in the third day, and we're going to have a prize that is going to be handed over at 2 p.m. So I would like to wish you a successful conference. I would like to also wish success to all the candidates for the prize. And I would like to thank once again Dr. Azmi Bishara, and may the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Thank you very much.